Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor, to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the Morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
One need not possess the prophetic gifts of Cassandra to observe that the American Imperium, that self-appointed guardian of global democracy and free enterprise, has begun to consume itself with the voracity of Saturn devouring his children. The symptoms of this autoimmune disorder are everywhere apparent to those who have not been narcotized by the endless stream of digital pabulum that now passes for public discourse. What we are witnessing transcends another cyclical crisis of capitalism, those periodic convulsions that Marx so tediously catalogued, and represents instead the spectacular immolation of a system that has mistaken its own reflection in the stock market for the face of God. Consider, if you can bear it, the grotesque spectacle of American healthcare, where the world's wealthiest nation has somehow contrived to make the preservation of human life a luxury good, rationed according to one's ability to navigate Byzantine insurance bureaucracies, or, failing that, to crowdfund one's own chemotherapy on social media platforms owned by billionaires who pay less in taxes than their secretaries. Here we have achieved what no foreign adversary could have managed, the transformation of illness into bankruptcy, of misfortune into financial ruin, all while maintaining the fiction that this represents the pinnacle of consumer choice. The average American diabetic, contemplating the monthly ransom demanded for insulin, a drug discovered a century ago by researchers who sold the patent for $1, might be forgiven for wondering whether this is what victory in the Cold War was supposed to look like. The lords of Silicon Valley, those pasty sovereigns of surveillance capitalism, have managed to convince an entire generation that their algorithmic feudalism represents liberation rather than servitude. These digital oligarchs have erected vast empires of extraction that surpass even the ambitions of the Gilded Age's robber barons. They have transformed human attention itself into a commodity to be harvested, packaged, and sold to the highest bidder, all while maintaining the insufferable pretense that they are somehow saving the world, one privacy violation at a time. The same platforms that promised to democratize information have instead created echo chambers so hermetically sealed that millions of Americans now inhabit entirely separate realities, each more divorced from empirical fact than the last. Meanwhile, the financial sector, that great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, to borrow Matt Taibbi's immortal phrase, has achieved a kind of transcendent uselessness that borders on the sublime in its sheer audacity. Having learned precisely nothing from the 2008 crisis, except that the government will always ride to their rescue, these masters of the universe continue to engineer ever more baroque instruments of speculation, each one further removed from any connection to productive economic activity. The entire economy has become financialized to such a degree that making things, actual, tangible objects that human beings might use, has come to seem quaint, almost primitive, compared to the sophisticated alchemy of derivatives trading and cryptocurrency speculation. The American worker, that forgotten hero of countless political speeches, has been reduced to a kind of precarious serf, juggling multiple jobs in the gig economy, a euphemism so transparently Orwellian that it barely merits deconstruction. The same corporations that have spent decades crushing unions and offshoring jobs now have the temerity to wonder why their workers lack loyalty and engagement. The social contract that once promised that hard work would lead to prosperity has been torn up and replaced with a lottery ticket. The American dream, that great mobilizing myth, has curdled into a cruel joke told by those who inherited their fortunes to those who will never earn one. Education, once the great equalizer and the engine of social mobility, has been transformed into a debt trap so exquisite in its cruelty that professional usurers might study it for inspiration. Young Americans now mortgage their futures for the privilege of obtaining credentials that may or may not lead to employment sufficient to service their loans. Universities have become hedge funds with libraries attached, their administrations bloated beyond recognition, while their adjunct faculty subsist on wages that Victorian factory workers might have organized strikes to protest. The very idea of education as a public good, as an investment in the collective future, has been abandoned in favor of a model that treats knowledge itself as a consumer product to be purchased at ruinous expense. The infrastructure of the Republic crumbles while the wealthy retreat to their private enclaves, serviced by their private schools, private security, and private jets. The trains don't run on time because the trains barely run at all. The bridges collapse, the power grids fail, the water systems poison entire cities, and yet somehow there is always money for another tax cut for those who need it least. We have moved beyond mere inequality into a kind of economic apartheid that makes a mockery of any pretense to democratic governance. When the richest man in the world pays a lower effective tax rate than a public school teacher, we have abandoned even the pretense of justice for pure, unadulterated farce. The political system, captured entirely by corporate interests, offers no remedy but only a choice between flavors of exploitation. The Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, has decreed that money is speech, thereby ensuring that those with the most money have the loudest voices. The result is a democracy so thoroughly hollowed out that it resembles nothing so much as a cargo cult, going through the motions of popular sovereignty while the actual levers of power remain firmly in the hands of an oligarchy that makes the Venetian patriciate look positively egalitarian by comparison. Climate change, that final bill come due for centuries of industrial excess, looms over everything like the sword of Damocles, and yet the response from the capitalist class has been to double down on the very behaviors that created the crisis. Oil companies, having known for decades about the catastrophic consequences of their business model, chose to fund disinformation campaigns rather than adaptation. The market, we are told, will provide solutions as if the market were some benevolent deity rather than a human construct that reflects nothing more noble than the aggregate of our greed and short-sightedness. What we are witnessing is pure destruction without the creative prefix, the kind of senile dementia that afflicts empires in their final stages. The American military, spread across hundreds of bases around the globe, maintains a garrison state that would have astonished the Romans, all while the homeland deteriorates into what Mao might have recognized as internal contradictions reaching their inevitable conclusion. The empire maintains the capacity to destroy the world several times over, but cannot provide clean drinking water to its own citizens. The cultural superstructure that once provided at least the illusion of shared purpose has dissolved into a kind of nihilistic individualism that mistakes consumer choice for freedom and personal branding for identity. Social media has created a nation of performers without an audience, each person broadcasting their carefully curated desperation into the void, hoping that somehow their personal narrative will be the one that breaks through the noise. The commodification of the self has reached its logical endpoint. Everyone is an entrepreneur of their own misery. This is how empires die, with hedge fund managers in the citadel rather than barbarians at the gates, with a leveraged buyout rather than a sacking. The American empire will not be conquered. It will be strip-mined, sold off piece by piece to the highest bidder, until nothing remains but a husk. A cautionary tale told in Mandarin and Hindi about what happens when a civilization mistakes the map for the territory, the market for the society, the price of everything for the value of anything. The crowning irony is that capitalism, having defeated all external challenges, has no enemy left but itself. Like an autoimmune disease, it attacks the very body it inhabits, mistaking its own organs for foreign invaders. The result is a kind of necrosis, a dying from within that no amount of Federal Reserve intervention can arrest. The patient is terminal, and the only question that remains is whether anything can be salvaged from the wreckage, whether some new form of political economy can emerge from the ashes, or whether we are doomed to simply repeat the cycle, each iteration more farcical than the last. The American empire, that great experiment in democratic capitalism, has become a monument to its own contradictions, a warning to future civilizations about the dangers of mistaking wealth for worth, power for purpose, and markets for morality. What makes this ending particularly squalid is its vulgarity. The empire expires with all the dignity of a clearance sale. Everything must go, no reasonable offer refused, rather than with even the shabby grandeur that attended Rome's decline.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over-opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain's Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over-Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over-opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott. Well, he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth. We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out, her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.vslay.com. That is www.vslay.com.
There exists in American cultural life a peculiar phenomenon: the elevation of credulity to the status of philosophy, the celebration of being so open-minded that your brain falls out, the monetization of uncritical thinking on an industrial scale. No one embodies this more perfectly than Joseph James Rogan, a man who has somehow parlayed his inability to distinguish between an epidemiologist and a conspiracy theorist into a media empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Let us be precise about what we're dealing with here. A former television host who convinced people to eat animal testicles for money has now become, and I use this word with physical pain, one of the most influential voices in American discourse. This is a man who treats the question, "Have you ever tried DMT?" with the same theological weight that Aquinas brought to proofs of God's existence. A man who platforms cranks and scholars with equal enthusiasm, nodding along with the same slack-jawed wonder whether his guest is explaining evolutionary biology or insisting that ancient civilizations had advanced technology. The Rogan phenomenon would be merely ridiculous if it weren't so symptomatic of a broader cultural collapse. Here is someone who has made a fortune from performing ignorance, from not knowing things in public, from treating every opinion as equally valid, regardless of evidence, expertise, or elementary logic. "I'm just a comedian," he protests whenever challenged, before proceeding to offer medical advice to millions of listeners. "Don't listen to me, I'm an idiot," he says, knowing full well that millions do listen to him, that they take their pandemic guidance from a man who once made people drink donkey semen on network television. The podcast, that endless, formless 3-hour ramble through the swamps of American paranoia, has become the premier platform for laundering extremism into the mainstream. The formula is as simple as it is insidious. Invite on someone with views outside the mainstream, let them speak for hours without meaningful pushback, occasionally interject with, "Wow, that's crazy, man," and then claim you're just having a conversation. When criticized, retreat behind the shield of free speech and hearing all sides, as if every side of every issue deserved equal consideration regardless of evidence. Consider the actual content of these conversations. When Alex Jones appears to spin his elaborate conspiracies about global elites, theories that have inspired actual violence, Rogan treats him like a slightly eccentric uncle rather than someone whose lies destroyed the lives of Sandy Hook families. When Graham Hancock presents his evidence-free theories about lost civilizations, he receives far more airtime than actual archaeologists. When Jordan Peterson delivers multi-hour monologues about the decline of Western civilization and the chaos dragons of feminine psychology, Rogan sits in rapt attention as if listening to Marcus Aurelius, rather than a psychology professor having an extremely public breakdown. The COVID episode deserves special attention, not merely for its impact, though the impact was real, but for what it revealed about the Rogan method. Here was a man with no medical training, no scientific background, no expertise whatsoever, who spent months questioning vaccine safety while promoting alternative treatments. When he contracted COVID, he announced he'd taken everything but the kitchen sink, including ivermectin, prescribed by a doctor, yes, but then promoted to an audience primed for months to distrust conventional medicine. I'm not a doctor, but became the prelude to medical musings that certainly influenced public behavior during a pandemic. And when actual doctors tried to correct misinformation, they were dismissed as the establishment, as big pharma shills, as part of the problem. Because in Rogan's world, a YouTube video about natural immunity carries the same weight as peer-reviewed research. This isn't healthy skepticism. It's the democratization of ignorance, the flattening of expertise into just another opinion in the marketplace. The masculinity cult that Rogan has built deserves particular scrutiny. This is a 50-something millionaire who spends his time getting high, watching fights, and talking into a microphone, somehow positioning himself as the arbiter of what makes a real man. The obsession with testosterone levels, with hunting, with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, with all the cartoon signifiers of masculinity, it would be pitiable if it weren't so influential among young men desperate for identity in a changing world. The supplement grift alone should disqualify him from being taken seriously about health. Here's a man who raises questions about FDA-approved medications while peddling alpha brain pills and athletic greens, who applies suspicious scrutiny to vaccines while promoting whatever untested powder his sponsors are pushing this week. The same critical thinking he claims to apply to mainstream medicine somehow evaporates when it comes to the snake oil his friends are selling. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the Rogan phenomenon is the way it has normalized and monetized stupidity, the way it has made ignorance seem like wisdom, confusion like clarity. The constant, "I don't know, man, it's entirely possible," applied to the most absurd propositions. It's entirely possible that we didn't land on the moon. It's entirely possible that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. It's entirely possible that DMT lets you talk to machine elves from another dimension. Everything is entirely possible when you abandon any standard for evidence. The comedy excuse deserves particular contempt. Rogan hasn't been funny since news radio ended. His stand-up specials are exercises in yelling observations about cancel culture and political correctness, delivered with the sophistication of a drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. Yet whenever he faces criticism for platforming extremists or spreading misinformation, suddenly he's just a comedian, just making jokes. Can't you take a joke? It's the same defense used by every provocateur since time immemorial. I was just kidding. Why are you so sensitive? The free speech absolutism he preaches is, of course, highly selective. Rogan will defend his right to platform anyone in the name of free expression, but had Spotify remove episodes at his request when controversy arose. He'll defend the right of his guests to spread propaganda, but has his team issue copyright strikes against critics who use his content. Free speech for me, terms and conditions for thee. The influence he wields over young men, and it is predominantly young men, cannot be overstated. Millions who should be developing critical thinking skills are instead listening to a stoned millionaire pontificate about float tanks and elk meat. They're absorbing his casual dismissal of expertise, his elevation of anecdote over data, his confusion of contrarianism with wisdom. They're learning that the guy who does his own research on YouTube knows more than someone with a doctorate in the field. And who are the enemies in this worldview? The experts, the scientists, the doctors, the historians, the journalists. Anyone who has actually studied something. Anyone who brings peer-reviewed research to a feelings fight. In Rogan's world, your buddy who saw a documentary about ancient aliens deserves equal time with the archaeologist who spent 30 years excavating sites. More than equal time, actually, because the archaeologist is probably compromised by academic orthodoxy. The Spotify deal, $200 million for the exclusive right to stream this content, represents capitalism's complete surrender to engagement metrics over information quality. Here's a platform that could amplify any voice, any expertise in human history, And they chose to make their flagship the endless monologue of a man whose main qualification is that people will listen to him talk about anything, no matter how uninformed he might be on the subject. What Rogan has created isn't just a podcast, it's an ecosystem where bad ideas get rehabilitated, where discredited theories find new life, where "I'm just asking questions" becomes a shield against any responsibility for the answers those questions imply. He's the gateway to the rabbit hole, the friendly face who makes extremism seem reasonable, the guy who's just having conversations that happen to mainstream views that were previously confined to the fringes for good reason. The tragedy isn't that Joe Rogan exists. There have always been barstool philosophers who think they've figured out what they don't want you to know. The tragedy is that technology has amplified him, that algorithms have rewarded him, that millions of people have confused his performed neutrality with brave truth-telling. He's not speaking truth to power, he's speaking nonsense to the powerless and making them feel empowered for believing it. This is what the marketplace of ideas has produced. Not the best ideas rising to the top, but the most engaging, the most controversial, the most likely to keep people listening through the ad breaks. Rogan isn't a philosopher or a truth seeker or even a particularly interesting conversationalist. He's a content factory, a controversy generator, an industrial-scale producer of what Frankfurt called bullshit. Speech unconcerned with truth or falsehood, only with effect. And the effect has been measurable. A generation of young men who think doing your own research means watching YouTube videos, who believe every institution is suspect except the institution of some guy with a podcast, who have been taught that ignorance is just another form of wisdom and probably a more authentic one. Rogan didn't create this moment, but he's monetized it more successfully than anyone else. The question isn't whether Rogan is influential. His download numbers prove that beyond doubt. The question is whether American culture can recover from what he represents. The complete collapse of epistemological standards, the reduction of all knowledge to opinion, the transformation of ignorance from a problem to be solved into a perspective to be marketed. Based on his Spotify numbers, the prognosis is not encouraging. The title of charlatan to Alex Jones would suggest a level of sophistication and self-awareness that this bellowing carnival barker simply does not possess. The charlatan, after all, knows he is peddling snake oil. He possesses at least the criminal virtue of intentionality. But Jones exists in that peculiar American tradition of the demagogue who has become so thoroughly marinated in his own fabrications that the distinction between performance and pathology has dissolved entirely. He is both con artist and mark, simultaneously fleecing his audience while hemorrhaging what remains of his own sanity into the void of conspiracy-addled paranoia. Let us begin with the most obvious observation. Jones has made a career and indeed a fortune from the systematic exploitation of human gullibility and grief. When 20 children and 6 educators were massacred at Sandy Hook Elementary School, most of humanity responded with horror and sorrow. Jones, however, saw an opportunity. He declared the slaughter a hoax, a staged event performed by crisis actors in service of a government plot to confiscate firearms. The parents of murdered 6-year-olds were not parents at all, he assured his audience, but paid performers in an elaborate theatrical production. It is difficult to identify a moral nadir more profound than monetizing the murder of children by tormenting their bereaved families. Yet Jones managed this feat with the casual ease of a man ordering lunch. The financial records tell their own sordid story. On November 18, 2016, when Jones took to his broadcast to declare he'd watched a lot of soap operas and knew when I'm watching a movie and when I'm watching something real, his InfoWars store raked in over $100,000 that day. April 22, 2017, when he published a video titled Sandy Hook Vampires Exposed, brought in $90,000. The correlation between his most vicious lies and his most profitable days is not coincidental. It is the business model. The families of the murdered children were not merely collateral damage in Jones's quest for ratings and revenue. They were the product. Their suffering was the content, and Jones sold it with the enthusiasm of a street hawker pushing counterfeit watches. The lawsuit judgments against him now total nearly $1.5 billion, representing not merely compensation for the tormented families, but perhaps the largest price tag ever attached to malicious mendacity in American legal history. But even in his courtroom humiliation, Jones could not resist the compulsion to perform. His lawyer accidentally sent the opposing counsel his entire phone records. including 2 years of text messages, a blunder so spectacular it could only happen to someone whose relationship with truth is purely coincidental. When confronted with his own messages, Jones squirmed and prevaricated with the desperate energy of a man who has built his entire existence on a foundation of lies and suddenly finds the ground giving way beneath him. The leaked texts revealed markups of 900% on supplements like VasoBeat, which Jones hawked as a powerful beat formula. The man who claimed to barely pay the bills was running one of the most profitable rackets in the conspiracy theory industry. Speaking of which, let us examine the sheer venality of Jones's operation. Between September 2015 and the end of 2018, the InfoWars store generated $165 million in sales. In 2014, Jones testified under oath that his operation was pulling in over $20 million annually. By 2019, his conglomerate of companies generated $76 million in gross revenue. And yet, throughout this period of extraordinary profitability, Jones maintained the performance of the beleaguered truth seeker, constantly begging his audience for financial support. "As much begging as I do, we can barely pay the bills," he whined to a caller while simultaneously presiding over an empire that would make most small-time grifters weep with envy. The shamelessness is almost admirable in its purity. What makes Jones particularly noxious is not merely the content of his conspiracy theories, though they are reprehensible enough. It is the cynicism with which he deploys them. This is a man who sells dietary supplements and survival gear to an audience he has systematically terrorized into believing that globalist forces are imminently planning their destruction. His business model is elegant in its sociopathy: manufacture fear, then sell the cure. The supplements, of course, are largely worthless. Independent testing found that products like Survival Shield contain nothing but iodine, while Oxy powder was revealed to be a compound of magnesium oxide and citric acid, common ingredients available anywhere for a fraction of Jones's inflated prices. But why should the efficacy of the product matter when the entire enterprise is built on exploiting the credulous? The product line reads like a parody of snake oil salesmanship. BrainForce Plus, which purports to enhance cognitive function, costs $37 for what amounts to green tea leaves in a bottle. There's also BrainForce Ultra, not to be confused with the regular BrainForce, because apparently the conspiracy-addled mind requires multiple tiers of bogus brain enhancement. Supermale Vitality promises to boost testosterone. Winter Sun Plus peddles vitamin D at inflated prices. During the COVID pandemic, Jones marketed colloidal silver products claiming they could kill every virus, including the whole SARS corona family, a claim so flagrantly false that even the FDA felt compelled to intervene with a warning letter. The man was literally trying to profit from a global health crisis by selling pseudoscientific garbage to a terrified public. Consider the sheer breadth of his paranoid fantasies. The government is turning frogs gay through chemical contamination. The September 11th attacks were an inside job. Mass shootings are false flag operations. A global cabal of pedophiles operates through the Democratic Party, and a pizza restaurant, a conspiracy theory that inspired an armed man to show up at said establishment. The COVID pandemic is simultaneously a bioweapon designed to facilitate authoritarian control, and also a hoax that's not as dangerous as they want you to think. Jones has accused the Ukrainians of staging the Bucha massacre to frame Russia. He's suggested that the introduction of an autistic Muppet on Sesame Street was designed to normalize autism, a disorder caused by vaccines, managing to insult both autistic people and basic medical science in a single conspiracy theory. These positions are not merely wrong, they are incoherent. But coherence is beside the point. The point is the constant state of agitation, the perpetual emergency that keeps the audience returning for more, clicking, sharing, and purchasing. The intellectual poverty of his method is staggering. Jones operates on the principle that asking questions, no matter how absurd, constitutes journalism. "I'm just asking questions," he bleats when confronted with the consequences of his accusations. But there is a vast chasm between legitimate inquiry and the malicious insinuation that tragedy is theater. A journalist investigates claims and follows evidence. Jones begins with a conclusion, cherry-picks anything that might support it, and dismisses all contrary evidence as part of the conspiracy. This is not skepticism, it is the opposite of skepticism. It is the absolute certainty of the fanatic dressed in the rhetorical costume of the truth seeker. His role in the January 6th insurrection deserves particular scrutiny. Jones spent weeks encouraging his followers to converge on Washington, promoting the rally with apocalyptic fervor. He helped organize and fund the event, allegedly contributing $50,000 of his own money for a top-speaking slot of his choice, and helping to arrange hundreds of thousands more in donations. On January 5th, he told a crowd in Freedom Plaza, "We have only begun to resist the globalists. We have only begun our fight against their tyranny. They have tried to steal this election in front of everyone. I don't know how this is all going to end, but if they want to fight, they better believe they've got one." The next day, he declared to the assembled mob, "We declare 1776 against the New World Order. We need to understand we're under attack, and we need to understand this is 21st century warfare and get on a war footing." When the House January 6th committee subpoenaed Jones, he responded in characteristic fashion by suing to block their investigation, and then, when that failed, pleading the Fifth Amendment nearly 100 times during his deposition. The committee had evidence that Jones was involved in planning and funding the rally, that he was supposed to lead the march to the Capitol, and that he had promoted the event as one of the most historic events in American history. His text messages, those accidentally leaked records, revealed communications with Roger Stone and other Trump allies. According to bankruptcy filings, Jones has been holding firearms for participants in the January 6th events, though the filing does not explain why the conspiracy theorist is storing weapons for people involved in an attempted insurrection. The image of Jones as an armorer for the seditious would be darkly comic if it weren't so sinister. Then there's the matter of his courtroom behavior. Jones was found in default judgment in multiple cases because of his repeated, flagrant refusal to comply with the discovery process. Judges characterized his conduct as showing flagrant bad faith and callous disregard for the responsibilities of discovery under the rules, and willful non-compliance. He was fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for contempt even before the trials began. When finally forced to testify, Jones claimed his net worth was no more than $5 million, a claim that financial forensic experts estimated to be off by a factor of between 30 and 50 times the actual value. Between 2021 and 2022 alone, Jones drew $62 million in member distributions from his company, of which he was the sole member. The man who positioned himself as a working-class hero fighting the elites was extracting tens of millions annually while crying poverty. The man's rhetorical style deserves special mention. Jones does not speak so much as he erupts. His broadcasts are characterized by an escalating fury that frequently culminates in his face achieving shades of crimson that would concern any reasonable observer of cardiovascular health. He shouts, he weeps, he removes his shirt for reasons that remain unclear. This is not the measured discourse of someone interested in truth. It is the performance of a professional wrestler who has confused the arena for a broadcast studio. The fact that millions of Americans have mistaken this howling spectacle for political analysis tells us something deeply troubling about the state of our national discourse. Throughout his career, Jones has demonstrated a remarkable ability to identify and exploit the vulnerable. When he falsely accused a man of being the Parkland shooter, ruining his life with lies spread to millions, it was not an aberration, but standard operating procedure. When he accused David Hogg, an actual survivor of that shooting, of being a paid crisis actor, YouTube finally issued a strike against his channel, though by then the damage was done. The pattern is consistent. Jones takes real tragedies involving real victims and transforms them into content for his paranoid audience, heedless of the human cost. The father of a Sandy Hook victim was forced to move multiple times to avoid harassment and death threats from Jones's followers. Parents testified in court about the trauma of being told their murdered children never existed, that their grief was a performance, that they were complicit in an elaborate hoax. Yet for all his bombast, Jones is fundamentally a coward. When finally held accountable in court, he could not muster the courage of his convictions. He admitted he was wrong about Sandy Hook, though only after his lawyers presumably explained that the alternative was financial apocalypse. This is the pattern with demagogues of his ilk. They are ferocious when bullying the powerless, the grieving, the vulnerable. But when faced with actual consequences, when the law finally catches up with them, they crumble. Jones's courtroom demeanor bore no resemblance to the raging prophet of his broadcasts. He was diminished, evasive, pathetic. The bankruptcy proceedings have revealed Jones's desperation in its full, inglorious detail. After filing for bankruptcy protection, he attempted to shield his assets through a Byzantine network of shell companies and family members. His supplement store was quietly transferred to a company owned by his father, a transparent attempt to keep the revenue stream flowing while claiming insolvency. When called out on this maneuver, Jones had the audacity to complain about his treatment, claiming he was being terrorized and stalked by the legal system, as if defending oneself against billion-dollar judgments for defamation constituted persecution rather than consequence. The attempted sale of InfoWars to The Onion, backed by the Sandy Hook families themselves, represents perhaps the most poetic justice in this entire sordid affair. The satirical news site intended to transform Jones's platform into a parody of itself, ensuring that the machinery he built to spread lies would be repurposed to mock conspiracy theories rather than promote them. Jones, predictably, sued to block the sale, preferring instead that his company go to First United American Companies, an entity with ties to Jones that would presumably keep him on the air. A bankruptcy judge ultimately rejected The Onion's bid on procedural grounds, but the families remained determined. In August 2025, a Texas judge ordered InfoWars assets turned over to a state-appointed receiver to be sold, with proceeds going to the families. Jones railed against the decision on his broadcast, but the legal walls continue to close in. The most depressing aspect of the Jones phenomenon is what it reveals about his audience. These are people so alienated from institutional authority, so convinced that they have been lied to, that they will believe anything provided it comes from outside the mainstream. They are not entirely wrong to feel this way. They have been lied to by politicians and corporations and media outlets, but their response has been to flee into the arms of a man who lies more brazenly, more constantly, and more profitably than any of the institutions they claim to oppose. They have mistaken the confidence of the con artist for the courage of the truth-teller. On the day Trump was elected in 2016, InfoWars sold nearly $850,000 in merchandise to an audience convinced they were supporting a heroic truth-teller rather than enriching a huckster. Jones represents the apotheosis of a particularly American strain of paranoid entrepreneurialism. He has taken the rich tradition of conspiracy thinking in this country, its soil fertilized by genuine government malfeasance and corporate criminality, and transformed it into a grotesque parody of itself. There are, of course, legitimate reasons to be suspicious of power. Intelligence agencies have conducted unconscionable experiments on unwitting citizens. Corporations have poisoned communities and lied about it, but Jones takes these legitimate grievances and metastasizes them into a worldview where everything is connected, where every tragedy is staged, where the enemy is simultaneously incompetent and all-powerful. The platforms eventually caught up with him. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Apple, Spotify, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Vimeo, and virtually every major social media platform banned Jones for repeated violations of policies against hate speech and harassment. PayPal terminated his business account. The InfoWars app was removed from both the Apple App Store and Google Play. Even Amazon, which continued hosting his supplement sales longer than most, faced pressure for profiting from his extremism. Jones complained bitterly about this censorship, failing to grasp that freedom of speech does not guarantee freedom from consequence or entitlement to a private platform. The man who spent years violating the terms of service he agreed to then cried persecution when those terms were enforced. His brief alliance with Donald Trump, who appeared on InfoWars during the 2016 campaign, proved financially lucrative, even as it exposed Jones as less interested in fighting the establishment than in cozying up to power when it suited him. The president praised Jones's amazing reputation, and Jones returned the favor by promoting Trump's election fraud lies in 2020, helping to create the conditions that led to January 6th. When that relationship eventually soured, it did not prevent Jones from continuing to extract maximum profit from his role in the MAGA ecosystem. Jones has done incalculable damage to the public sphere. He has poisoned discourse, traumatized the innocent, and provided a template for a generation of grifters who understand that in the age of social media, there is no claim so outrageous that it cannot find an audience. He has demonstrated that you can build an empire on lies, that you can torment grieving families and face no immediate consequences, that you can peddle poison as patriotism and find millions willing to drink deeply. He has shown that you can accuse the parents of murdered children of being actors, that you can sell worthless supplements at criminal markups, that you can help incite an insurrection against the Capitol, and still, for years, face no meaningful accountability. The billion-dollar judgment against him offers a measure of justice, though it can never truly compensate his victims for what they have endured. The families have spent years in bankruptcy court trying to collect what they are owed, watching Jones play shell games with his assets while continuing to broadcast and sell his snake oil. But perhaps these judgments serve a useful purpose beyond the particular case. They establish, at least in principle, that there are still limits, that at some point the lies become so harmful that even in America, land of the First Amendment, there must be a reckoning. Jones built his career on the premise that he could say anything without consequence, that his followers' devotion would shield him from accountability, that the legal system could be gamed indefinitely through obstruction and bankruptcy maneuvers. The courts have finally, belatedly, proven him wrong. The receiver now has authority to seize his property, change the locks on his studios, access his bank accounts and storage facilities, and liquidate his assets. Sheriffs have been authorized to assist in carrying out these orders. Whether this deters his imitators remains to be seen. The conspiracy theory industrial complex shows no signs of slowing, and Jones himself insists he will stay on the air regardless of what happens to InfoWars, doubtless planning to continue the grift from whatever platform will have him. But at least we can take satisfaction in knowing that this particular merchant of madness has been forced to pay something approximating the true cost of his contemptible enterprise. The man who profited from the murder of children, who helped organize an attack on American democracy, who built an empire on exploiting fear and grief, has finally been held accountable. It took far too long, and the damage he caused can never be fully repaired. But the spectacle of Jones, diminished and desperate, watching his empire crumble under the weight of his own lies, offers at least a modicum of justice in a world where such justice has been far too rare. The American healthcare system stands as the most spectacular monument to human cruelty ever erected in peacetime, a vast machine designed not to heal the sick, but to extract maximum profit from human suffering. It is a system so perfectly perverted that Victorian workhouse administrators look charitable by comparison, so efficiently predatory that it turns the Hippocratic Oath into a bitter joke. First, do no harm. In America, it's first, check their coverage. Consider the beautiful simplicity of the con. Take the one thing people will pay anything for, their lives, their children's lives, their freedom from pain, and then build an impenetrable bureaucracy designed to deny them access to it after they've already paid. It's not enough to charge them. You must charge them and then refuse to deliver what they've paid for. It's like running a fire department that charges for coverage, but then declares your house pre-existing when it actually catches fire. The numbers alone should trigger a revolution. The United States spends $13,000 per capita on healthcare, double what Germany spends, triple what the UK spends, quadruple what South Korea spends. And what do we get for this extraordinary largesse? Lower life expectancy than Costa Rica, higher infant mortality than Slovakia, worse health outcomes than any developed nation and most developing ones. We're paying Rolls-Royce prices for Pontiac Aztek results, that hideous crossover that topped every worst car list for a decade. Except at least the Aztek would actually take you somewhere, which is more than American healthcare can promise. But the true genius of the American healthcare system isn't just that it's expensive and terrible. Plenty of things manage that. No, the real achievement is that it's expensive, terrible, and specifically designed to be both. This isn't incompetence, it's malice. This isn't failure. It's the system working exactly as intended. Take the beautiful innovation of prior authorization, wherein insurance companies, staffed by people whose medical expertise extends to denying claims, get to override your doctor's medical decisions. Your physician, who went to medical school, completed residency, and has examined you personally, says you need a medication or procedure, but some anonymous bureaucrat with a checklist possibly in a call center thousands of miles away, gets to say no. It's as if we let insurance adjusters override airline pilots about whether the plane needs maintenance. The denial industry, and make no mistake, it is an industry, has developed its own ecosystem of suffering. First, they'll deny the claim automatically, hoping you'll give up. If you persist, they'll demand documentation. When you provide documentation, they'll say it's insufficient. When you provide more, they'll say it's the wrong kind. When you finally provide exactly what they asked for, they'll say the deadline is passed. It's Kafka's The Trial, but with chemotherapy. And should you have the temerity to get sick without proper documentation of coverage, God help you, the bills will arrive like cluster bombs. One from the hospital, one from each doctor who glanced at your chart, one from the anesthesiologist you never met, one from the radiologist who read your scan from home, one from the lab that processed your blood. Each will be for an amount that bears no relationship to reality. $47 for a single Tylenol, $5,000 for a 10-minute ambulance ride, $30,000 for an emergency room visit where they gave you fluids and sent you home. The prices themselves are fiction, of course. The hospital charges $10,000 for a procedure, knowing the insurance company will negotiate it down to $2,000, which is still 5 times what it actually costs. But if you don't have insurance, you pay the full fictional $10,000. It's the only industry where the price depends not on the service, but on who's asking, like a bazaar run by psychopaths. The propaganda machine that maintains this system is a masterwork of manipulation. We have the best healthcare in the world, they cry, which is true if you're a billionaire who can afford the Mayo Clinic's executive health program. For everyone else, it's like claiming you have the best restaurant in the world because there's caviar on the menu that no one can afford, while the majority are eating from dumpsters. But under socialized medicine, you'll wait months for treatment, they warn, as if Americans aren't already waiting. Not for treatment, but to save enough money to afford it. As if people aren't already rationing insulin, cutting pills in half, skipping doses to make prescriptions last longer. As if cancer patients aren't already launching GoFundMe campaigns, begging strangers on the internet for the privilege of not dying. The British wait a few weeks to see a specialist for free. Americans wait forever because they can't afford to see one at all. But at least our wait times are efficient, infinitely efficient, because you can't measure the wait time for care you never receive. But government health care is inefficient, they shriek, conveniently ignoring that Medicare, our government-run program for the elderly, has 2% administrative costs, while private insurance companies spend 20% on administration, which is a euphemism for denying claims and executive bonuses. The inefficiency isn't in government, it's in having a parasitic middleman whose entire business model depends on collecting premiums and not paying for care. Every other developed nation on Earth has figured this out. France, with its supposedly impossible socialist healthcare, has better outcomes at half the cost. Japan covers everyone for less than we spend just on emergency room visits for the uninsured. Even Cuba has lower infant mortality than the United States of America. But sure, tell me again how the free market is the solution, while Americans ration insulin like it's wartime. The insulin racket deserves special mention in this carnival of cruelty. The same insulin that costs $30 in Canada costs $300 in America. The same insulin that Frederick Banting sold the patent for in 1923 for $1 because he believed it belonged to the world. That insulin. Drug companies have made minor tweaks to extend patents and jack up prices on a medication that diabetics need to not die. It's like if someone patented water and then charged $100 a glass to people dying of thirst. And the American people, bless their propagandized hearts, defend this system even as it bankrupts them. They've been so thoroughly brainwashed that they think paying $500 a month in premiums for the privilege of having a $10,000 deductible is freedom. They've been convinced that the ability to choose between insurance plans that will all equally deny their claims is liberty. They wave their flags and declare that dying of preventable diseases is the American way. The reality? Polls consistently show that 70% of Americans support universal health care, including a majority of Republicans. But what the people want and what the people get are two different things in this democracy of ours. The health insurance industry spends $700 million a year on lobbying. That's nearly $2 million a day to ensure that Americans keep dying profitably. The executives of these insurance companies make salaries that defy comprehension. The CEO of United Health made $142 million in 2021. That's $68,000 an hour, including the hours he was sleeping. He makes more in a day than most Americans see in a year, and he makes it by ensuring those Americans can't see a doctor. It's blood money, quite literally. Every denied claim, every rejected procedure, every person who dies because they couldn't afford treatment is a rounding error on his quarterly bonus. The hospitals are no better, transforming from places of healing into profit centers that happen to have beds. They're run by MBAs who've never touched a patient except to check their wallet. They optimize for billing, not healing. They'll spend millions on a new wing named after a donor, while nurses work double shifts because they won't hire enough staff. They'll invest in robot surgery systems for the publicity, while their emergency rooms look like something from the developing world. And then there's the special American innovation of medical bankruptcy, a phrase that exists nowhere else in the developed world, because nowhere else allows medical bills to destroy people's lives so thoroughly. Over 500,000 Americans declare bankruptcy every year due to medical bills. These aren't deadbeats or wastrels. They're people who had the audacity to get cancer without first becoming millionaires. They're people who thought their insurance would actually insure them, only to discover that coverage is not the same as care. The cottage industry of medical debt collection is particularly vile, buying up medical debt for pennies on the dollar and then hounding people to their graves for money they don't have. They'll garnish wages, seize assets, and destroy credit ratings over bills that are often errors, duplicates, or already paid. It's vulture capitalism at its most literal, feeding on the carrion of human misery.
Hope you enjoyed our show so far. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to end the show with a blast from the intellectual past, a provocative thought: why every U.S. president was a war criminal. Provocative thought: why every U.S. president is a war criminal. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
You said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable.
It's probably true.
Can we run down them real fast? What did Eisenhower do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala by military coup and invasion, leading to years of, in Iran it led to 25 years of brutal dictatorship, finally overthrown in 79. In Guatemala it led to massive atrocities, which are still continuing. That's after almost 50 years. In Indonesia, this wasn't known until recently, but he conducted the major clandestine terror operation of the post-war period up until Cuba and Nicaragua in an effort to break up Indonesia, strip off the outer islands where most of the resources are, and undermine what was then considered as a threat of Indonesian democracy. Indonesia was too free and open. It was allowing a political party of the poor to participate, and they were gaining a lot of ground. So that Eisenhower supported and helped instigate a military rebellion in the outer islands. This is just for starters. These are all indictable offenses.
What about Kennedy?
Kennedy was one of the worst. Kennedy, first of all, invaded South Vietnam. During the Eisenhower administration, they had blocked a political settlement in 1954 and instituted a kind of a Latin American-style terror state, which had killed maybe 60 or 70,000 people by the end of the Eisenhower period, and had instigated a response, a reaction. Kennedy recognized that it couldn't be controlled internally, so he simply invaded. In 1962, about a third of the bombing missions that were carried out by the U.S. Air Force in U.S. planes with South Vietnamese insignia, but U.S. pilot. He authorized napalm. He began the use of chemical weapons to destroy food crops. They began programs which drove millions of people into what amounted to concentration camps. Now, that's aggression. In the case of Cuba, it was just a massive campaign of international terrorism, which almost led to the destruction of the world, led to the missile crisis. And we can continue. Again, these are all indictable offenses.
About Johnson?
Well, Johnson expanded the war in Indochina to the point where ended up probably leaving 3 or 4 million people dead. He invaded the Dominican Republic to block what looked like a potential democratic revolution there, supported the Israeli occupation in its early stages. Again, we can go around the world. Take, say, Carter.
I'll get there, but Nixon's next.
The Nixon we don't even have to talk about. We can skip that one, okay? But
Ford, then Ford.
Well, Ford was only there for a short time, but long enough to endorse the Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which became about as close to genocide as anything in the modern period. They pretended to oppose it, but secretly supported, in fact, not so secretly, the U.S. Immediately after the invasion, the U.S. did join the rest of the world in formally condemning it at the Security Council. But Ambassador Moynihan was kind enough to explain to us, in his words, that his instructions were to render the United Nations utterly ineffective in any actions it might take to counter the Indonesian invasion. And he says proudly that he did this with considerable success. His next sentence says, in the next few months, it seems that about 60,000 people were killed. And then he goes off to the next topic. That's the first few months, went on to probably hundreds of thousands. Formally, the U.S. announced a boycott of weapons, but secretly it increased the supply of weapons, including counterinsurgency equipment, so that the Indonesians could consummate the invasion. That's just a short period in office, but that's indictable. Seriously, in fact, that's a major war crime. Carter increased, as the Indonesian atrocities were increasing. They peaked in 1978. Carter's flow of weapons to Indonesia increased. When Congress imposed human rights restrictions, by then there was a human rights movement in Congress, to block the flow of advanced weaponry to Indonesia, Carter arranged through Mondale, vice president, to get Israel to send U.S. Skyhawks to Indonesia to enable Indonesia to complete what turned out to be near genocide, killing maybe a quarter of the population or something. In the Middle East, Carter just won the Nobel Prize. His great achievement was the Camp David agreements. The Camp David agreements are presented as a diplomatic triumph for the United States. In fact, they were a diplomatic catastrophe. At Camp David, the United States and Israel accepted, finally, Egypt's 1971 offer, which they had then, U.S. had rejected at the time, except that now it was worse from the U.S.-Israeli point of view because it included the Palestinians. In order to get Israel to accept Egypt's 1971 offer, after a major war and atrocities and so on, Carter raised aid, military and other aid to Israel, to more than 50% of total aid worldwide. Israel used it at once in exactly the way they said they were going to do, as every sane person knew, as an opportunity to attack their northern neighbor, first in 1978, then in 1982, and to increase integration of the occupied territories. And that's for starters. We can continue.
Reagan?
I don't think we have to talk about that one either. I mean, Reagan is the first president to have been condemned by the International Court of Justice for what they called the unlawful use of force, meaning international terrorism in the war against Nicaragua. Again, that's just for starters. They also, the Security Council, endorsed it in 2 resolutions, both of which were vetoed by the United States.
Bush won.
Well, we can begin with the invasion of Panama. The invasion of Panama, which, according to the Panamanians, killed about 3,000 people, since it's never investigated. We don't know if that's true or not. This was done in order to kidnap a disobedient thug who had been supported by the United States right through his worst atrocities.
Noriega.
He was brought to Florida and tried for crimes that he committed mostly on the CIA payroll. Okay, that's aggression. We could go into the details of the war in Iraq, but there were plainly opportunities for, they might not have worked, we don't know, but there were opportunities for diplomatic settlement, which the Bush administration refused to consider. And incidentally, the press would not report, with a single exception, and Long Island Newsday, which did report the whole story throughout accurately, and is the only newspaper in the country to have done so. The Bush administration then did attack, and the attack was carried out in a manner which is criminal under the laws of war. They attacked infrastructure. I mean, if you attack New York City and you destroy the electrical system, the power system, the sewage systems, and so on, that amounts to biological warfare, and that's the nature of the attack. Then came a sanctions regime, which it's mostly Clinton, but began with Bush, which is, by conservative estimates, killed hundreds of thousands of people while strengthening Saddam Hussein. That takes us off to Clinton, which, that's the beginning. That's by no means the end. We can run through it. Well, we can run through that one case suffices.
All right.
But there are plenty of others.
Bush too?
Well, let's go on with Clinton.
Okay.
And one of Clinton's minor escapades, very minor, was sending a couple of cruise missiles to the Sudan to destroy what they knew to be a pharmaceutical plant. There was no intelligence failure. According to the only estimates we have from the German ambassador and the regional director of Near East Foundation, who does field work in Sudan, both of them estimate several tens of thousands of deaths from one cruise missile attack. It's pretty serious. If somebody did that to us, we'd regard it as bad news. And again, we can continue. In the Middle East, for example, Clinton began by declaring past UN resolutions, in the words of his administration, obsolete and anachronistic. Okay, so we're finished with that. No more international law. Then comes a period called the peace process, except that during the peace process, Israeli settlement, which means settlement paid for by the U.S. taxpayer and supported by U.S. military aid and diplomacy, continually increased. The most extreme year was Clinton's last year, the highest level of settlement, the highest since 1992. Meanwhile, the territories were cantonized, broken up into small regions with infrastructure projects and new settlement. I don't know what you call that, but it's under military occupation. And if anyone else was doing it, we'd call it a war crime. And again, we can continue. Bush too, I don't think we have to discuss.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.